At my daughter's funeral, while my hand was still clutching the dirt meant for her grave, my son-in-law whispered that I had 48 hours to get out of his house. I did not argue. I did not scream. I just nodded, packed my bags, and quietly left. But he forgot one thing about me. I used to hunt financial criminals for a living. And the next morning, when the sheriff knocked on his door, he realized that kicking out a retired forensic accountant was the biggest mistake of his life. Before I tell you how I brought his entire world crashing down, please subscribe to the channel and hit the like button if you believe that justice always finds a way. Let me know in the comments what city you are watching from. I love reading your stories. The rain in Seattle does not wash things clean. It just makes the dirt heavier. That is all I could think about as I stood there, my dress shoes sinking into the mud of the cemetery lawn. The sky was a bruised shade of gray, weeping a relentless drizzle that soaked through my old wool coat. I was cold, but I barely felt it. The only thing I could feel was the hollow ache in my chest, a void where my daughter Emily used to be. She was only 32, a heart attack, the doctors said, a freak occurrence, a tragedy. But as I stared at the mahogany casket being lowered into the wet earth, the word tragedy felt insufficient. It felt like a theft. I am Henry Caldwell. I am 70 years old. Most people look at me and see a retired old man who drives a rusted Ford truck and spends too much time reading newspapers. They see the wrinkles, the gray hair, and the slow walk. They do not see the man who spent 40 years working for the state, analyzing complex financial records to find the hidden money that drug lords and corrupt politicians tried to bury. I made a career out of noticing the details that others missed. I made a living out of seeing the truth behind the lie. But on that Tuesday morning, standing over my daughter's grave, I was not a hunter. I was just a father who had outlived his child. I felt small. I felt weak. I felt like the world had ended. It was my turn to throw the first handful of dirt. It is a tradition, a final goodbye. My hand trembled as I reached into the silver bowl the funeral director held out. The soil was cold and damp against my skin. I stepped forward, my knees shaking. I thought I might collapse right there into the open grave. Then I felt a hand on my shoulder. Firm. Heavy. It was Derek, my son-in-law. To the 50 or so people gathered around us, friends, neighbors, Emily's colleagues, it looked like a gesture of support. A grieving husband comforting his grieving father-in-law. Derek looked the part perfectly. He was wearing a custom-tailored black Italian suit that probably cost more than my entire wardrobe. His hair was perfectly styled despite the rain. He held a black umbrella over my head, shielding me from the downpour. He looked like the picture of dignity and sorrow. He dabbed at his dry eyes with a silk handkerchief, sniffing loudly enough for the people in the back row to hear. I leaned into his support, grateful for a moment that I wasn't standing alone. Then he leaned in close to my ear. I expected a whisper of comfort. I expected him to say, "Stay strong, Henry, or we will get through this." Instead, his breath was hot against my neck, and his voice was a low, venomous hiss that chilled me more than the freezing rain. "You have 48 hours, Henry." I froze. My hand, still full of dirt, hovered over the casket. I turned my head slightly, trying to look at him, thinking I had misheard. My hearing isn't what it used to be, and the sound of the rain was loud against the umbrella. Derek squeezed my shoulder harder. His fingers dug into my trapezius muscle, painful and sharp, hidden beneath the heavy wool of my coat. He kept his face forward, staring somberly at the coffin, performing for the audience behind us. But his voice continued low and steady, meant only for me. "You heard me, old man. I want you and your junk out of my house by Thursday morning. The funeral is over. The charity is over. I don't want to see your pathetic face in my hallway ever again." The shock hit me harder than a physical blow. The air left my lungs. This was the man I had welcomed into my family. This was the man my daughter had loved. This was the man who lived in the house that I had paid for. 5 years ago, I sold my family farm, the land my father and grandfather had tilled, to put a down payment on that sprawling Victorian mansion in the suburbs so Emily could have her dream home. I lived in the guest suite on the first floor. I thought we were a family. I thought we were a team. Why, I managed to croak out. My voice was barely a whisper. Derek finally looked at me. For a split second, the mask of the grieving widower slipped. His eyes were cold, dead, and impatient. There was no sadness in them, only calculation. "Because looking at you makes me sick," he whispered, a cruel smile playing on the corners of his lips that probably looked like a grimace of pain to anyone watching from a distance. "And because I am selling the house. I have debts, Henry, big ones. And a $2 million property is the only way out. You are just a tenant, an expired tenant. Now throw the damn dirt and let's get this over with." He squeezed my shoulder one last time, a warning grip, then patted it gently as he pulled back, returning to his performance. I stood there paralyzed. The dirt in my hand felt like lead. My mind was reeling. Selling the house debts. Derek was the regional director of a real estate firm. He drove a Porsche. He bragged constantly about his bonuses. How could he be in debt? And how could he be talking about selling Emily's home before her body was even in the ground? Mechanically, purely out of muscle memory, I let the dirt fall from my hand. It hit the wooden lid of the coffin with a hollow thud. That sound, earth hitting wood, is the loneliest sound in the world. I stepped back, my legs feeling like jelly. I almost stumbled, but I refused to grab Derek's arm for balance. I would rather fall into the mud than touch him again. I walked away from the grave, moving toward the line of black cars parked on the paved path. I needed to get away from him. I needed to think. My heart was pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs, a mixture of grief and sudden white-hot rage. As I reached my old truck, parked awkwardly between two sleek Mercedes limousines, something caught my eye. About 50 yards away, parked under the shelter of a large weeping willow tree, was a black Audi sedan. The windows were tinted dark, almost opaque. It was idling, the white exhaust puffing into the cold air. It stood out because it wasn't part of the funeral procession. It was parked facing the exit, ready to leave quickly. I paused, my hand on the door handle of my truck. My instincts, dormant for years, suddenly flickered to life. The forensic accountant in me woke up. Why was that car there? Who watches a funeral from a distance? As if sensing my gaze, the driver's side window of the Audi rolled down just an inch, then 2 inches. I squinted through the rain. I couldn't see much, just a silhouette. A woman. She was wearing large, dark sunglasses even though it was a cloudy, rainy day. She had a scarf wrapped around her head, obscuring her hair. But she wasn't looking at the grave. She wasn't looking at the priest. She was looking directly at Derek. And Derek, standing by the grave accepting condolences from a weeping neighbor, looked up. He looked right past the mourners, right past me, and locked eyes with the car. He didn't wave. He didn't nod. He just stared for a second, and then he pulled out his phone and tapped a quick message. A moment later, the window of the Audi rolled up. The brake lights flared red, and the car slipped silently away, disappearing into the mist and the traffic of the main road. A shiver went down my spine that had nothing to do with the cold. My daughter had died of a sudden heart attack. Her husband wanted to sell the house immediately. He was kicking me out within 48 hours. And a mysterious woman was watching us from the shadows. I climbed into my truck and slammed the door, shutting out the sound of the rain. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. Derek thought I was just a sad, broken old man. He thought I was helpless. He thought he held all the cards because his name was on the deed to the house. He was right about one thing. I was broken. But he was wrong about the rest. I wasn't helpless. And as I started the engine, watching him act the part of the grieving widow in the rearview mirror, I made a silent vow to my daughter. I wasn't going anywhere. Not until I found out who was in that car. And not until I found out exactly what kind of debts a man accumulates that makes him sell his dead wife's home over her fresh grave. Derek wanted a war. He just didn't know he had declared it on a man who had spent 40 years destroying liars much smarter than him. I put the truck in gear. The clock was ticking. 48 hours. That was all the time I had. And as it turned out, that was all the time I needed. The drive back from the cemetery was suffocating. The silence inside the luxury sedan was thick enough to choke on, broken only by the rhythmic thumping of the windshield wipers fighting against the Seattle downpour. Derek drove with one hand on the wheel, the other scrolling through messages on his phone, completely ignoring the fact that he was driving the father of his late wife home from her funeral. I sat in the passenger seat, staring out at the gray blur of the highway, my mind racing to process the ultimatum he had whispered to me over the open grave. 48 hours. When we pulled into the driveway of the Victorian estate, the house looked different to me. Before today, it had been a sanctuary. It was a sprawling 3-story structure with white siding and a wraparound porch nestled in a neighborhood where the lawns were manicured with surgical precision. But now it looked like a fortress that I was being expelled from. Derek didn't wait for me. He killed the engine, grabbed his umbrella, and strode toward the front door, leaving me to brave the rain alone. By the time I shuffled up the porch steps and stepped into the foyer, he had already shed his jacket and was loosening his tie. The grieving husband act had evaporated the moment the front door clicked shut. His shoulders relaxed, his posture straightened, and the look of sorrow was replaced by a look of sheer annoyance. He didn't even look at me as he walked toward the kitchen. He just threw a command over his shoulder. "The boxes are in the garage, Henry. Start with your room. Whatever isn't packed by tomorrow night goes to the curb on Thursday morning, and do not scratch the hardwood floors with your old furniture." I stood there in the foyer, water dripping from my coat onto the expensive Persian rug. I looked around the house. The high ceilings, the crown molding the crystal chandelier that caught the dim light. Every inch of this house screamed wealth and stability, and every inch of it was a lie. My heart twisted as a memory forced its way to the surface. It was 5 years ago. I was standing in the middle of a dusty field in Kansas, watching an auctioneer sell off the tractor that my father had taught me to drive. I had sold the farm. I had sold the land that had been in the Caldwell family for 3 generations. The soil where I had learned to walk, the barn where I had kissed my wife for the first time, the porch where I had rocked Emily to sleep. I sold it all. Every acre. Every memory. I did it because Emily had called me, crying tears of joy. She told me Derek had found the perfect house for them to start a family in, but they were short on the down payment. They needed 60% to secure the mortgage they wanted. I didn't hesitate. I liquidated my life to build theirs. I remembered handing Derek the check. It was for $400,000. He had hugged me then. He had looked me in the eye and said, "This is your home too, Dad. We will build an in-law suite on the ground floor. You will never have to worry about anything again." I looked at the walls now. I had paid for them. I had paid for the roof that was keeping the rain off Derek's head. And now he was treating me like an unwanted piece of furniture that clashed with the decor. I took a deep breath, fighting the urge to scream, and followed him into the kitchen. Derek was pouring himself a glass of scotch. He didn't offer me one. He took a long sip, savoring the burn, and finally turned to face me. "Derek," I said, my voice steady despite the trembling in my hands. "We need to talk about this. You cannot just throw me out. This is my home. I sold everything to help you buy this place." He set the glass down on the marble countertop with a sharp clink. "Correction, Henry. You gave a gift. That is how the tax documents were filed. A gift. You have no legal claim to this property. And as for this being your home, that arrangement was contingent on Emily being here. Emily is gone. Therefore, the arrangement is void." The cold corporate logic of his words was chilling. He spoke about his dead wife, my daughter, as if she were a clause in a contract that had expired. It is not just about the house, I argued, stepping closer. It is about Leo. He just lost his mother. He is 10 years old, Derek. He is confused and scared. He needs his grandfather. You cannot take his mother away and then rip his grandfather away from him in the same week. It will destroy him. Derek laughed. It wasn't a happy sound. It was a dry, dismissive bark. He picked up an apple from the fruit bowl, inspected it, and then took a bite, chewing slowly, as he looked me up and down with open contempt. Leo is resilient, he said, swallowing. What Leo needs is to move on. He needs a fresh start. He does not need a depressed old man shuffling around the house, reminding him of death every time he walks into a room. You are dead weight, Henry. You are bad energy. You bring the mood down. I am trying to sell this house, and having you here looking like a ghost is bad for business. Bad for business. My daughter's death. My grandson's trauma. My life. To him it was all just numbers on a balance sheet. He walked past me, heading into the living room. I followed him, my anger rising. The living room was filled with flowers sent by mourners. White lilies. Their scent was overpowering, sickly sweet and suffocating. On the mantel above the fireplace stood a framed photograph. It was taken on their wedding day. Emily was laughing, her head thrown back, looking radiant in white lace. Derek was looking at her with what I thought was love. Derek stopped in front of the mantel. He stared at the photo for a long moment. I thought for a second that he was going to show some emotion. I thought he was going to break down. Instead, he reached out and picked up the frame. He looked at it with a sneer, as if the happiness captured in the image was offensive to him. She was so weak, he muttered almost to himself. Always complaining. Always sick. Then, with a casual flick of his wrist, he tossed the silver frame into the trash can next to the sofa. The sound of the glass shattering against the metal bottom of the bin echoed through the silent house like a gunshot. I felt like he had slapped me. That wasn't just a photo. That was my daughter. That was the last 5 years of her life. He had discarded her memory as easily as he was trying to discard me. Pack your bags, Henry, he said, not even looking back at the trash can. I have a staging crew coming tomorrow morning to prep the house for listing. If your room isn't empty, they will empty it for you. And trust me, they won't be gentle. He turned and walked toward the stairs, his footsteps heavy on the hardwood. He didn't look back. He didn't care. I stood alone in the living room, staring at the trash can. My hands were balled into fists at my sides. The rage was a hot, burning coal in my gut. I wanted to retrieve the photo. I wanted to salvage the glass. But I couldn't move. Then I heard it. It was faint at first, buried under the sound of the rain and the humming of the refrigerator. But then it came again. A soft, muffled sound. A whimper. It was coming from the top of the stairs. I looked up toward the darkness of the second-floor landing. The door to Leo's room was slightly ajar. Through the crack I could see a sliver of light. And then I heard the sound that broke my heart completely. It was the sound of a 10-year-old boy trying to cry into his pillow so his father wouldn't hear him. It was a lonely, terrified sound. Derek was wrong. Leo wasn't resilient. Leo was broken, and he was alone up there with a monster. I looked at the trash can one last time. Then I looked at the stairs. Derek thought he had won. He thought he had broken me. But hearing my grandson cry changed everything. I wasn't just going to pack my bags. I was going to pack my arsenal. I turned around and walked quietly toward the garage. Not to pack, but to find the one thing I had hidden in my tool chest years ago. A key. A spare key to the master bedroom that Derek didn't know existed. The game was on, and he had no idea who he was playing against. The hallway was a tunnel of shadows. The only light came from the street lamps outside filtering through the rain-streaked windows, casting long skeletal shapes against the floral wallpaper. It was 2 in the morning. The house was silent, but it was a heavy, oppressive silence, the kind that feels like it is holding its breath before a scream. I knew I should be in my room packing. I knew I should be admitting defeat and preparing to leave. But I could not go, not without seeing him, not without making sure my grandson was safe. I moved slowly toward Leo's room, my socks sliding noiselessly on the hardwood floor. I knew this house better than Derek did. I knew which floorboard creaked outside the bathroom and which door hinge needed oil. I had fixed them all myself over the years. I reached the door to Leo's room and turned the handle with agonizing slowness. It clicked softly, a sound that seemed deafening in the stillness. I pushed the door open just enough to slip inside. The room smelled of clean laundry and the faint metallic scent of the model airplanes Leo loved to build. He was lying in bed, but he wasn't asleep. He was curled into a tight ball under his duvet, staring at the wall. When he heard me, he flinched, pulling the covers up over his head. "It is just me, Leo," I whispered, keeping my voice low. "It is Grandpa." The covers lowered slowly. 2 wide, terrified eyes peered out at me in the darkness. His face was pale, and his eyes were swollen from crying. Seeing him like that, so small and defenseless in the bed that I had assembled for him, broke my heart all over again. "Grandpa," he breathed, his voice trembling. "Is Dad coming?" "No," I said, moving quickly to the side of his bed. I sat down on the edge of the mattress, the springs groaning softly under my weight. I reached out and brushed the hair from his forehead. His skin was cold. "Dad is asleep. I just wanted to check on you." Leo sat up and threw his arms around my neck. He buried his face in my chest, his small body shaking with silent sobs. I held him tight, smelling the shampoo. Emily used to wash his hair. It was the same scent she had used on herself. For a moment I closed my eyes and let the grief wash over me, but I forced it back. I had to be strong for him. "I am scared," Grandpa Leo whispered into my shirt. "I do not want you to leave. I heard him yelling at you. He said you are going away." I pulled back gently so I could look him in the eye. "Listen to me, Leo. I am not going anywhere. I might have to go away for a day or 2 to fix some things, to make things right, but I will never leave you. Do you understand? I am going to fix this." Leo wiped his nose on his sleeve. He looked at the door, then back at me, his eyes wide with a fear that a 10-year-old child should never have to know. "He is scary, Grandpa," Leo said, his voice dropping to a barely audible whisper. "He is not like he used to be. Ever since Mom got sick, he is different. He smiles, but his eyes are mean." My stomach tightened. I knew Derek was cold, but I hadn't realized Leo had seen it too. Children see everything. We think we are protecting them, but they are the most observant witnesses in the world. "What do you mean, Leo?" I asked, keeping my voice calm, though my pulse was starting to race. "How is he different?" Leo picked at a loose thread on his blanket. He hesitated, looking conflicted. "He and Mom used to fight. At night, when they thought I was asleep, Mom would cry and say she didn't want to sign the papers. She said it was wrong. She said she wouldn't let him use the money for his risky business." I stiffened. Papers. Risky business. This was the first time I was hearing about Emily refusing to sign anything. Derek had told me everything was amicable. And then Leo continued, his voice shaking even more than he started bringing her the juice. "The juice," I repeated, confused. Every night, Leo said, after dinner, he would bring her a glass of orange juice. He said it was for her heart. He said the doctor ordered it. But Mom hated it. She said it tasted bitter. She said it made her feel dizzy. But he would stand there and watch her drink it. He wouldn't leave the room until she finished every drop. And then... Leo paused, tears spilling down his cheeks again. "And then what, Leo?" I asked, a cold dread settling in the pit of my stomach. "And then she would sleep," Leo whispered. "She would sleep so heavy, Grandpa." I tried to wake her up once because I had a nightmare, but she wouldn't wake up. She just lay there. And Dad was sitting in the corner of the room in the dark, just watching her breathe. He looked like he was waiting for something. The air left the room. My world stopped spinning. Bitter orange juice, dizziness, heavy sleep, and a husband watching his wife breathe, waiting. I am not a doctor, but I spent 40 years analyzing patterns of fraud and deception. And in that moment, the pattern became clear. It wasn't a heart attack. It wasn't stress. Digoxin. I remembered a case from 10 years ago. A nurse who killed patients for their inheritance. She used digoxin. It is a heart medication, but in high doses it causes nausea, dizziness, and eventually cardiac arrest. It is bitter. You have to mask the taste in something strong, like orange juice. My daughter didn't die. She was murdered. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. I felt bile rise in my throat. I looked at my grandson, this innocent boy who had unknowingly witnessed his mother being poisoned night after night. He watched her drink it, Leo said again. He made sure she drank it all. I gripped Leo's shoulders. "Listen to me, Leo. You are very brave for telling me this. Did you ever tell anyone else, the doctors?" "The police," Leo shook his head violently. "No. Dad said if I told anyone about our family secrets, they would take me away to a foster home. He said I would never see you again." That son of a bitch. He had terrified his own son into silence. I pulled Leo into a hug again, tighter this time. I needed to anchor myself. I felt a rage so pure and white-hot that I thought I might burn the house down right then and there. But I couldn't. I needed proof. I needed to be smart. If I acted now, if I confronted him without evidence, he would destroy it all. He would win. "I promise you, Leo," I whispered fiercely. "Nobody is taking you away, and nobody is going to hurt you. I am going to stop him." Suddenly, the floorboards in the hallway creaked. Leo froze in my arms. "It is him," he gasped. I heard it too, heavy footsteps, slow, deliberate, coming from the master bedroom down the hall. Thud, thud, thud. He was coming to check on Leo, or maybe he had heard us. "Quick," I whispered. "Lie down. Pretend you are asleep." Leo scrambled back under the covers, pulling them up to his chin. He squeezed his eyes shut, his breathing shallow and fast. I looked around the room frantically. The bed was too low to hide under. The window was locked. The closet. I dove toward the closet, slipping inside just as the heavy footsteps reached the door. I pulled the louvered doors shut, leaving a tiny crack to see through. I held my breath, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I pressed myself back against the hanging clothes, Leo's winter coats and school uniforms, trying to make myself as small as possible. The door to the bedroom creaked open. A slice of light from the hallway cut across the floor. A shadow fell over the bed. Derek stepped into the room. He was wearing his silk pajamas. He looked casual, relaxed. He didn't look like a man who had just buried his wife. He looked like a man who was patrolling his territory. He walked to the side of the bed where I had just been sitting. He looked down at Leo. Leo lay perfectly still, feigning sleep with a skill born of terror. Derek stood there for a long time. Too long. He reached out and touched Leo's cheek. Leo didn't move. "Good boy," Derek whispered. Then Derek turned his head. He looked around the room. He sniffed the air. My heart stopped. Could he smell me? Could he smell the old tobacco from my pipe that clung to my coat? Or the damp wool from the rain? He took a step toward the closet. I pressed my hand over my mouth, praying to a God I hadn't spoken to in years. "Please, Not now. I need to finish this. Derek reached for the handle of the closet door. His fingers wrapped around the brass knob. I tensed my muscles, preparing to fight. I was 70 years old, but if he opened that door, I would go for his eyes. I would not let him touch Leo. Suddenly, his phone buzzed in his pocket. The sound was loud in the silence. Derek paused. He let go of the handle and pulled the phone out. The screen lit up his face, casting ghostly shadows in his eyes. He read the message and smirked. Finally, he muttered. He turned around, shoved the phone back into his pocket, and walked out of the room, pulling the door shut behind him. I waited for the sound of his footsteps to fade back toward the master bedroom. I waited until I heard his door click shut. I let out a breath I had been holding for what felt like an hour. I looked through the slats at Leo, who opened one eye to check if it was safe. We shared a look in the darkness. A pact. I wasn't just a grandfather anymore, and I wasn't just an accountant. I was the only thing standing between this boy and a monster, and I knew exactly what I had to do next. The orange juice, the papers, the money. It all left a trail, and I was going to follow it straight to hell if I had to. The morning sun that filtered through the kitchen blinds did not bring warmth. It only illuminated the dust motes dancing in the air, the dust of a house that was already beginning to feel abandoned. I stood by the counter nursing a cup of lukewarm coffee, watching the driveway through the window. It was 8 o'clock in the morning. I had been awake since 4, my mind replaying the conversation with Leo, dissecting every word, every pause, every tremble in his voice. Derek walked into the kitchen smelling of expensive cologne and aggression. He did not say good morning. He adjusted his tie in the reflection of the microwave and checked his watch. "The appraiser is here," he announced, his voice tight. "Behave yourself, Henry. She is a top-tier professional from the city. I need this valuation to go smoothly so we can list the property by the weekend. If you say one word to sabotage this, I will throw your belongings onto the lawn in the rain." I did not respond. I just took a sip of my coffee. I wanted to see this professional. A moment later, the front doorbell rang. Derek rushed to answer it, his demeanor shifting instantly from hostile jailer to charming host. I followed him slowly into the foyer, leaning against the doorframe, making myself as invisible as the wallpaper. The door opened and a woman stepped inside. "Hello, Derek," she said, her voice smooth like velvet, with a slight rasp that some men might find attractive. I found it grating. "Hello, Tanya," Derek replied, stepping back to let her in. "Thank you for coming on such short notice." She stepped into the light of the hallway, and the air in my lungs froze. It was her, the woman from the cemetery. The sunglasses were gone, revealing sharp, predatory eyes heavily lined with makeup, but the jawline and the posture were unmistakable. She was wearing a tailored navy blue pantsuit that fit a little too perfectly, and her blonde hair was pulled back in a severe bun. But it was not her face that caught the attention of my forensic eye. It was what she was carrying. Slung over her forearm was a handbag. To the untrained eye, it was just a black leather bag. But I spent 40 years auditing the assets of people who tried to hide their wealth. I knew luxury goods better than I knew the back of my own hand. That was a Hermes Birkin. Specifically, a black Togo leather Birkin 35 with gold hardware. That bag alone cost more than $20,000. I looked at her shoes. Christian Louboutin, another $1,000. I did the mental math instantly. A real estate appraiser in this district makes a decent living, maybe $80,000 a year if they hustle. They do not carry handbags that cost a quarter of their annual salary to inspect suburban homes. This woman was not an appraiser. She was a player. And she was playing a game with my family's legacy. "I am Henry," I said, stepping forward from the shadows. "Derek's father-in-law." Tanya flinched slightly, as if she hadn't noticed me standing there. She recovered quickly, flashing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, hello," she said, offering a hand that was cold and limp. "I am Tanya. I am here to assess the property value for the listing. I shook her hand briefly, noting the manicured nails and the absence of a wedding ring. Nice bag, I said, keeping my voice neutral. Business must be good. Her eyes flickered to her bag, then back to me, a flash of irritation crossing her face. It is a replica, she lied smoothly. I cannot afford the real thing. It was not a replica. The stitching was hand-done. The grain of the leather was uneven in the way only natural high-grade hide is. She was lying. And if she was lying about the bag, she was lying about everything. Let me show you around, Derek interrupted, shooting me a glare that could peel paint. We have made some upgrades to the kitchen and the master bath. I followed them as they moved through the house. I stayed a few paces back watching, always watching. They walked with a familiarity that strangers do not possess. They moved in sync. When Derek turned left, she was already turning. When he stopped to point out the crown molding, she was already nodding before he spoke. They went upstairs. I followed, my heart hammering against my ribs as they approached the master bedroom. This was Emily's room. Her scent still lingered in the air, faint traces of lavender and vanilla. Her clothes were still in the closet. Her book was still on the nightstand, a bookmark halfway through. Derek walked in without hesitation. Here is the master suite, he said. Plenty of natural light. Tanya walked to the window, pretending to inspect the view. But as she turned back, I saw it. It happened in a split second. As Derek walked past her to open the walk-in closet, her hand brushed against his. It wasn't an accidental bump. Her fingers lingered on his wrist, a soft, intimate caress, and her thumb grazed his palm. It was a gesture of ownership, a gesture of lovers. My stomach churned. My daughter had been dead for 3 days. 3 days. And this woman was standing in her bedroom, touching her husband, holding a $20,000 bag, and pricing her home. So I spoke up, my voice cutting through the silent communication passing between them. What are the comps in this neighborhood looking like, Tanya? The market has been fluctuating. Tanya stiffened. She turned to me, her smile tight. Excuse me. The comparables, I pressed, walking into the room. The house down the street sold for $1.2 million last month, but it had a finished basement. We do not. How are you adjusting for the square footage difference? And what capitalization rate are you using for the rental potential? If an investor buys it, it was basic real estate terminology. Any rookie agent would know it. Tanya blinked. She looked at Derek, a flash of panic in her eyes. Well, she stammered, shifting her weight from one expensive heel to the other. We look at the general aesthetic. The market is very hot right now. We focus on the emotional value of the home. Emotional value, I scoffed. Banks do not lend on emotional value, Tanya. They lend on appraisals. You do have your license number handy, right? I would like to verify it with the state board before we proceed. Enough! Derek roared. He spun around, his face red with rage. He marched over to me and shoved me hard in the chest. I stumbled back into the hallway, catching myself on the doorframe. Get out, Henry, he spat, pointing a shaking finger at the stairs. I told you not to interfere. This is none of your business. Go to your room and pack your trash. If I see you down here before she leaves, I am calling the police and having you removed for trespassing. I looked at Derek. I saw the fear behind his anger. I had rattled them. Fine, I said, straightening my coat. I will leave you to your business. I turned and walked away, but I didn't go to my room. I stopped just around the corner of the hallway, pressing my back against the wall. I heard Tanya let out a huff of breath. That old man is a problem, Derek, she hissed, her voice low but audible. You said he was senile. He knows about the bag. He knows about the comps. Relax, Derek soothed. He is leaving tomorrow. He is powerless. Just finish the walkthrough. We need the paperwork signed by noon so the transfer goes through before the weekend. I heard the click of heels as Tanya walked out of the bedroom, likely heading toward the bathroom to compose herself. As she passed the spot where I had been standing, I heard something fall, a soft flutter of paper landing on the hardwood floor. "Damn it," she muttered, but she didn't stop. She kept walking toward the bathroom. I waited 5 seconds. Then I stepped back into the hallway. Lying on the floor, right where she had paused to adjust her bag, was a crumpled piece of paper. It must have fallen out when she reached for her phone or compact. I stooped down and picked it up. My joints popped a reminder of my age, but my hands were steady. It was a parking receipt from SeaTac International Airport. Long-term parking. I scanned the dates. The entry date was 10 days ago. The exit date was 3 days ago. The day Emily died. Why was a local real estate agent parked at the airport for a week? And then I saw the flight number printed on the attached luggage tag stub that was stapled to it. Flight 402 from the Cayman Islands. My blood ran cold. The Caymans. That was where the money went. That was the offshore haven for every white-collar criminal I had ever investigated. Tanya wasn't just a mistress. She was the courier. She had been moving money. And she came back the exact day my daughter died to collect the final payout. I folded the receipt and slipped it into my pocket. It felt heavier than a stone. This wasn't just adultery. This wasn't just greed. This was a conspiracy. I looked toward my room where my empty suitcases were waiting. Derek wanted me to pack, so I would. But I wasn't packing clothes. I was packing evidence. I had 24 hours left, and now I had a destination for the money. All I needed to do was prove how they got it. I walked to my room, the sound of their whispers drifting from the bathroom. They thought they were cleaning up a mess. They had no idea they had just handed me the mop. The 48 hours expired with the gray punctuality of a prison sentence. Thursday morning arrived, bringing with it a relentless drizzle that turned the driveway into a slick black mirror. I stood in the hallway of the house I had purchased, the house where my daughter had taken her last breath, and I looked at my reflection in the hallway mirror one last time. I saw a man in a faded flannel shirt and work boots looking every day of his 70 years. My shoulders were slumped. My eyes were downcast. It was a perfect disguise. I dragged my large, battered leather suitcase toward the front door. The wheels were old and wobbly, making a rhythmic clatter against the hardwood floor that echoed through the silent house. Clack, clack, clack. It was the sound of departure. The sound of defeat. Derek was waiting for me on the front porch. He was leaning against a white pillar, his arms crossed over his chest, checking his watch with exaggerated impatience. He was dressed for work, immaculate in a charcoal suit, looking like the master of the manor, surveying a servant who had been dismissed. "You are cutting it close, Henry," he said, as I stepped out into the cold, damp air. "The staging crew arrives in 20 minutes. I do not want your old truck blocking the driveway when they get here." I stopped and set the suitcase down. I let out a long, shuddering sigh, making sure he saw the vapor of my breath in the cold air. I looked up at him, letting my lower lip tremble just slightly. I had interrogated hardened embezzlers who could lie without blinking, so acting like a broken old man was child's play for me. "You win, Derek," I said, my voice cracking perfectly on the last syllable. "I am too old to fight you. I called the Sunrise Nursing Home in Tacoma. They have a bed for me in the assisted living wing. I suppose it is for the best. Leo does not need to see me like this." Derek's face softened, not with kindness, but with satisfaction. The tension in his shoulders released. He had won. The nuisance was removing itself. "It is for the best, Henry," he said, his tone almost patronizingly gentle now that he had gotten his way. "You will be taken care of there. You can play cards, make friends your own age. Leo and I will visit. Maybe around Christmas. Christmas. That was 8 months away. He was effectively burying me alive. I nodded slowly, picking up the handle of my suitcase. I did not offer him a handshake. I just turned and walked toward my truck. The Ford F-150 was a dinosaur rusted around the wheel wells, but the engine was solid. I heaved the suitcase into the passenger seat. It was incredibly heavy, far heavier than a bag of clothes should be, but Derek was too busy gloating to notice the strain in my biceps as I lifted it. I climbed into the driver's seat and started the engine. It roared to life with a familiar rumble. I looked out the window. Derek was still standing on the porch. He gave me a small dismissive wave like one would shoo away a stray dog. I put the truck in reverse and backed out of the driveway. As I shifted into drive and pulled onto the street, I watched in the rearview mirror. Derek waited until I was at the stop sign. Then he turned around, walked back into the house and slammed the heavy oak door shut. The moment that door closed, the slump in my shoulders disappeared. I straightened my spine. The trembling in my hands vanished, replaced by a steady iron grip on the steering wheel. I let the facade of the heartbroken grandfather melt away, revealing the cold, calculating forensic auditor underneath. I drove to the end of the suburban street past the manicured lawns and the white picket fences. At the main intersection, the sign pointed left toward the highway that would take me to Tacoma and the nursing home. I turned right. I did not accelerate toward the highway. Instead, I navigated the truck toward the industrial district on the south side of the city. The scenery changed rapidly. The trees and parks were replaced by chain-link fences, graffiti-covered walls, and the looming skeletons of abandoned factories. This was the part of Seattle the tourists never saw. It was gritty, it was loud, and it was the perfect place to disappear. I pulled into a self-storage facility that looked like a fortress of corrugated metal. It was a place for forgotten things, old furniture, broken dreams, and secrets. I punched a code into the keypad at the gate, a code I had memorized 3 days ago. The gate rattled open. I drove to the back of the lot to Unit 402. It was an orange shipping container that had been converted into a storage unit. It was isolated, hidden behind a stack of wooden pallets. I parked the truck and killed the engine. The silence here was different. It wasn't the suffocating silence of the house. It was the silence of focus. I grabbed the heavy suitcase from the passenger seat and unlocked the padlock on the container door. The heavy metal doors swung open with a groan, revealing a small, dark space. It smelled of rust and cold air. I stepped inside and pulled a string that hung from the ceiling. A single bare light bulb flickered to life, casting harsh shadows against the metal walls. The container was empty, except for a folding table and a plastic chair I had set up earlier. I hefted the suitcase onto the table. I ran my hand over the worn leather. Derek thought this bag contained my flannel shirts, my wool socks, and maybe a few framed photos of the past. He thought it contained the remnants of a life that was over. I unzipped the main compartment. Inside, there were no clothes. Nestled in custom-cut foam padding was a mobile command center that would make a federal agent jealous. I pulled out a high-performance mini-server with dual encrypted hard drives. I pulled out a signals interceptor capable of cloning Wi-Fi traffic from 300 yards away. I pulled out a directional antenna and a set of noise-canceling headphones. I began to set up. My movements were precise and practiced. I connected the server to a portable power bank. I booted up the laptop. The screen glowed blue, illuminating my face in the dim container. I typed in a sequence of commands. Connecting to target network Caldwell Guest. I had never removed my administrator access from the router at the house. I had set that network up. I knew its backdoors better than Derek knew the floor plan. Success. A moment later, the screen split into 4 quadrants. Camera 1, the living room. I saw the staging crew arriving, moving furniture around. Camera 2, the kitchen. Empty for now. Camera 3, the hallway. Camera 4, the master bedroom. I put on the headphones. The audio feed crackled for a second, then cleared up. I could hear the staging manager asking Derek where to move the sofa. I leaned back in the plastic chair, the cold metal of the container walls irrelevant now. I was no longer homeless. I was no longer helpless. I was the ghost in the machine. I was the eye in the sky. Derek had given me 48 hours to leave. I had left, but I hadn't gone far. I watched Derek on the screen. He was laughing at something the movers said, looking relaxed, looking free. He thought the game was over. He thought he had cleared the board. I reached into the side pocket of the suitcase and pulled out the crumpled parking receipt I had found yesterday. I pinned it to the wall of the container with a magnet. It was the first piece of the puzzle, the first nail in his coffin. I adjusted the volume on the headphones and stared at the digital image of my son-in-law. "You wanted me out of the house so you could have some privacy, Derek," I whispered to the empty container. "Well, you have got the house, but you have zero privacy." I cracked my knuckles. "Let the game begin, son." The rain outside the shipping container hammered against the metal roof like 1,000 tiny fists, but inside the world was silent and digital. My fingers flew across the keyboard, a familiar rhythm I had not felt in years. Forensic accounting is not just about math. It is about psychology. It is about understanding that every dollar leaves a footprint, no matter how carefully someone tries to sweep it away. And Derek, for all his arrogance, was leaving muddy tracks all over my screen. I logged into the family's cloud server. Years ago, when Emily complained about losing her photos, I had set up an automatic backup system for the entire household. Every document, every receipt, every email that passed through their shared network was mirrored here. Derek thought he had locked me out of the house, but he had forgotten that I held the keys to the digital vault. I started with the bank accounts. Derek had claimed he was drowning in debt. He said the business was failing. He said he needed to sell the house to survive. I pulled up the statements for his primary business account. The numbers on the screen told a different story, a story that made my blood boil. The business was not failing. It was thriving. But the money was bleeding out. I saw a pattern that every rookie investigator knows. Structuring. It is illegal and it is a dead giveaway for money laundering. Every Tuesday and Friday for the past 6 months, there was a cash withdrawal. $9,000, $9,500, $9,200. Always just below the $10,000 threshold that triggers an automatic report to the IRS. I did the mental math. Over 6 months, he had siphoned off nearly $500,000 in cash. $500,000. Where did it go? You cannot shove $500,000 under a mattress. It has to go somewhere. I opened a new window and accessed Emily's personal savings account. My heart stopped. The balance was zero. 6 months ago, there had been $80,000 in there. Money she had saved for Leo's college fund. Money I had given her for her birthday. Gone. Transferred out in a series of loans to a shell company called Apex Consulting. I searched the state business registry for Apex Consulting. No record. It was a ghost. A fake entity created solely to drain my daughter's life savings. My hands shook with rage. I had to clasp them together to stop the trembling. He had not just killed her. He had robbed her blind while she was still alive. He had stolen her security, her son's future, and he had done it while sleeping in the bed next to her. I took a deep breath, forcing the anger down. Anger makes you sloppy. I needed to be cold. I needed to find where the money landed. I went back to the cloud backup and searched for deleted emails. People always think hitting delete makes things disappear. It does not. It just hides them. I found it in the trash folder from 2 weeks ago. An email from a bank in Georgetown, Grand Cayman. Subject, account verification, TD Investments. TD, Tanya and Derek. I opened the attachment. It was a welcome letter for a high-yield offshore investment account. The initial deposit $500,000. There it was. The smoking gun. He wasn't in debt. He was hiding a fortune. He was stealing from his own family to build a golden parachute for him and his mistress. I stared at the screen, the blue light reflecting in my glasses. I felt a wave of nausea. This wasn't just greed. This was meticulous, calculated evil. He had planned this for months, maybe years. And then a notification pinged in the corner of the screen. A new email had just arrived in Derek's inbox. I clicked on it. From Global Life Insurance. Subject claim status update. Policy. AT29.0. I opened the email. Dear Mr. Vance, we are writing to confirm that your claim for the life insurance policy of Emily Vance has been received. The payout amount of $5 million is currently under final review pending the coroner's report. Once approved, funds will be dispersed within 5 business days. $5 million. The room spun. I had to grab the edge of the metal table to steady myself. He had taken out a $5 million policy on her, and now he was days away from cashing it in. The timeline clicked into place with terrifying clarity. The cash withdrawals, the offshore account, the mistress, the sudden heart attack, the rush to sell the house. It was never about debt. It was about a clean break. He was going to take the insurance money, sell the house for another $2 million, and disappear to the Caymans with Tanya, leaving Leo behind with nothing but a dead mother and a grandfather in a nursing home. I looked at the number on the screen, $5 million. That was the price he had put on my daughter's life. I felt a tear slide down my cheek, hot and angry. I wiped it away roughly. There would be time to mourn later. Right now, there was only time to hunt. I saved every document. I downloaded every statement. I encrypted the files and sent a copy to a secure server in Switzerland that only I could access. The blue light from the monitors was burning my eyes, but I could not blink. I was deep inside the rabbit hole now, and what I found was darker than simple greed. I had traced the money, yes, but I needed to understand the mechanics of the fraud. How does a healthy 32-year-old woman die of a heart attack without an autopsy raising red flags? The answer lay in a folder I found buried deep within Derek's hidden Cloudbox drive labeled simply as Project E. I opened a file named medicalhistorydraft.pdf. My breath caught in my throat. It was a fabrication of a life my daughter never lived. Derek had spent the last 6 months systematically creating a digital paper trail of phantom illnesses for Emily. I saw emails sent from his account to a private cardiologist, one who had lost his license 3 years ago for malpractice, asking for advice on his wife's chronic palpitations. I read fake diary entries he had typed up in her name describing dizzy spells and chest pains that she never actually had. He was planting seeds. He was building a narrative so that when she finally collapsed, the doctors would look at the history and nod, saying, "Ah, yes, she had a pre-existing condition." But the document that made my blood run cold was a scanned PDF of a do not resuscitate order. It was dated 2 weeks before her death. At the bottom was Emily's signature. I zoomed in until the pixels blurred. I knew my daughter's hand. I knew the way she looped her E and the sharp slant of her Y. This signature was a forgery. It was a good one, likely traced from our mortgage papers, but it lacked the hesitation of a living hand. It was too perfect. Derek had signed my daughter's death warrant before he even poured the poison. He had ensured that if the paramedics arrived and found a faint pulse, they would legally have to step back and let her die. The sheer calculation of it, the cold administrative evil, made me want to vomit. I switched the view to the live camera feed from the living room. It was now late evening. Derek and Tanya were sitting on the couch, drinking the wine I had bought for my anniversary with Emily. They were looking at a brochure. I turned up the audio gain on my headphones. "What about this one?" Tanya asked, pointing at a glossy page. "St. Jude's Military Academy. It's in Switzerland. Boarding starts at age 10. Derek took the brochure, swirling his wine. Switzerland is good, far away, out of sight, out of mind. The tuition is steep, though. We can afford it with the insurance money, Tanya replied, resting her head on his shoulder. Besides, we can't have him moping around here. He's creepy, Derek. The way he looks at me, it's like he knows. He doesn't know anything, Derek scoffed. He's a traumatized kid. We'll ship him off next month. Tell the neighbors he needed specialized grief counseling abroad. By the time he's 18, he'll be a distant memory. I tore the headphones off my ears and threw them onto the metal table. The sound of their clatter echoed like a gunshot in the small container. They weren't just planning to steal the money. They were planning to exile my grandson. They were going to ship Leo off to a military school on another continent, isolating him, stripping him of his family, his home, and his history, just so they could enjoy their blood money without a guilty conscience. That was the moment the last shred of hesitation left my body. Up until now, I was an investigator building a case. Now I was a soldier going to war. The law takes time. Warrants take days. I didn't have days. If they were planning to move Leo, I had to act immediately. I looked at the clock. 1:45 a.m. The house would be dark. The monsters would be asleep. I reached into my bag and pulled out my lockpicking kit and a pair of black gloves. I didn't just need digital proof anymore. I needed something physical. I needed the weapon. And I was going to walk right into the lion's den to get it. You want $5 million, Derek, I whispered to the screen. I will give you something else instead. I will give you a cell number. I closed the laptop. The rain outside had stopped, but the storm inside me was just beginning. I had the motive. I had the money trail. Now I just needed the murder weapon. And I knew exactly where to find it. The city lights of Seattle were a distant blur as I drove my old truck back toward the suburbs. The dashboard clock read 2:14 in the morning. It is the hour when honest men sleep and ghosts wander. Tonight, I was neither. I was a man on a mission, and my destination was the home I had paid for, the home where my enemy was currently sleeping in my daughter's bed. I parked the truck 3 blocks away under the shadow of a large oak tree. I did not want to trigger the motion sensor floodlights in the driveway. The rain had started again, a cold, relentless drizzle that soaked through my jacket instantly, but I welcomed it. The rain muffles sound. It washes away tracks. It was my ally. I approached the house from the back, moving through the neighbor's garden, stepping carefully over the flower beds I had planted myself 2 springs ago. The house loomed dark and silent against the night sky, a sleeping beast that had swallowed my family whole. I reached the back door. Derek had changed the locks on the front door yesterday. I had seen the locksmith's van on my surveillance feed, but he had forgotten about the mudroom entrance. And more importantly, he didn't know about the magnetic key box I had hidden inside the hollow leg of the patio table. My fingers, stiff with cold, fumbled for a moment before retrieving the key. It slid into the lock with a soft, satisfying click. I turned it slowly, holding my breath. The door opened without a sound. I stepped inside. The air in the house was warm and smelled faintly of Tanya's perfume, a heavy, musky scent that seemed to choke the memory of Emily's lavender out of the hallway. I felt a surge of nausea, but I pushed it down. Focus, Henry. Focus. I needed 2 things. Physical access to Derek's laptop to bypass the encryption on his private files, and anything that could link him to the poison. I moved through the kitchen like a shadow. My boots were wrapped in thick wool socks to dampen the noise. I passed the refrigerator, the hum sounding like a jet engine in the silence. I made my way to the study, which was just down the hall from the master bedroom. The door to the master bedroom was open. I froze. From where I stood in the dark hallway, I could see the foot of the bed I had bought for Emily and Derek as a wedding gift. They were there. Derek was asleep, his arm thrown carelessly over his eyes. and beside him, curled up where my daughter should have been, was Tanya. She was wearing one of Derek's shirts. Seeing them together sleeping peacefully in the home they had stolen filled me with a rage so potent it almost blinded me. I wanted to storm in there. I wanted to wake them up and make them confess. But I forced my feet to move past the door. Not yet. Not until I had the nail for the coffin. I slipped into the study and gently closed the door, leaving it just a hair ajar so I could hear if anyone moved. I didn't turn on the light. I pulled a small high-powered flashlight from my pocket and clamped it between my teeth. Derek's laptop was on the mahogany desk. It was in sleep mode. I pulled a USB drive from my pocket. This wasn't a standard drive. It was a forensic extraction tool loaded with software that could mirror a hard drive in minutes without leaving a trace. I plugged it in. The screen lit up, casting an eerie blue glow in the room. I typed in a command to bypass the password. The progress bar appeared. Copying, 10%, 20%. The seconds stretched into hours. I could hear my own heartbeat thumping in my ears. I looked around the room. On the shelf, Derek had already started removing the books I had given him over the years. In their place were flashy real estate trophies and a bottle of expensive scotch. 60%. Suddenly I heard a sound. A toilet flushed. It came from the upstairs bathroom. Leo. I froze. The progress bar was at 85%. I heard small footsteps on the stairs. Leo was coming down. He sometimes got water in the middle of the night. If he saw me, he would scream. If he screamed, Derek would wake up. And if Derek woke up, this would end in violence and I would lose my chance to put him away legally. I killed the screen brightness instantly. I crouched down behind the heavy oak desk, praying the glowing LED on the USB drive wouldn't give me away. The footsteps got closer. They were soft, hesitant. Grandpa. My heart stopped. He had sensed something. Or maybe he had seen the truck. I held my breath until my lungs burned. Silence. Then the sound of the refrigerator door opening, the clink of a glass, the refrigerator door closing, and then the footsteps retreated. Back up the stairs. Back to safety. I let out a breath that was more of a shudder. I checked the screen. Download complete. I yanked the drive out and slipped it into my pocket. One objective down. Now for the poison. I crept out of the study and headed back toward the kitchen. I needed to check the trash. Derek was meticulous, but criminals always make mistakes when they get comfortable. And tonight, sleeping with his mistress in his dead wife's bed, he was comfortable. I opened the cabinet under the sink where the recycling bin was kept. It was empty. The maid must have emptied it. I checked the main trash can. Coffee grounds, takeout containers, and then at the very bottom, buried under a greasy pizza box, I saw it. A small amber plastic bottle. The label had been ripped off, but some sticky residue remained. I reached in, ignoring the filth, and pulled it out. It rattled. There were still pills inside. I shone my flashlight on it. It wasn't a prescription bottle. It looked like a generic vitamin bottle. But when I unscrewed the cap and tipped a pill into my gloved hand, it wasn't a vitamin. It was a small white round tablet. No markings. Digoxin pills are often white and round. I carefully put the pill back and slipped the bottle into a plastic evidence bag I had brought with me. I had the data. I had the weapon. I moved to the back door, my heart pounding a rhythm of triumph. I was about to turn the handle when I heard a voice. It came from the master bedroom. Derek, it was Tanya. She sounded sleepy. Did you hear that I froze my hand on the doorknob? Hear what Derek mumbled, his voice thick with sleep. I thought I heard the back door. You are dreaming, babe. Go back to sleep. The old man is gone. We won. I stood there in the dark, listening to them settle back into the pillows. We won. I gripped the cold brass handle of the door. Enjoy your sleep, Derek, I thought. Because when you wake up, the nightmare begins. I slipped out into the rain, the evidence bag warm in my pocket. I merged with the shadows, disappearing into the night, leaving no trace but the invisible noose I had just tightened around their necks. The drive to the laboratory took me to the other side of the city, where the skyline of Seattle faded into a grid of warehouses and nondescript brick buildings. The rain had finally stopped, leaving behind a thick, heavy fog that clung to the streets like a shroud. I pulled my truck into the parking lot of a small private toxicology lab run by an old friend named Dr. Aris. We had worked together years ago on a case involving a CEO who was poisoning his board members to secure a merger. Aris was the best in the business, a man who preferred molecules to people, and he was the only person I trusted with what I carried in my pocket. I knocked on the steel back door, a rhythmic tap we had agreed upon over the phone 10 minutes ago. Aris opened it immediately. He was a thin man with gray hair and nervous eyes, wearing a white lab coat over his pajamas. He did not ask how I was doing. He simply stepped aside and let me in. The lab smelled of antiseptic and ozone, a sterile scent that felt miles away from the warm, suffocating perfume of my daughter's bedroom. I pulled the plastic evidence bag from my pocket and placed it on the stainless steel table. Inside, the amber bottle looked innocent. It looked like something you would buy at a health food store for $10, but my gut told me it was worth a life. Aris put on a pair of blue latex gloves. He picked up the bottle and examined the label residue under a magnifying lamp. Then he opened the cap and poured a few of the small white tablets onto a glass dish. It says vitamin C on the bottom code. Aris muttered, his voice echoing in the quiet room. But these are not vitamins. The binding agent is different. The press mark is inconsistent. He took one of the pills and crushed it into a fine powder, then mixed it with a reagent solution. He placed the sample into a spectrometer. The machine hummed to life, a low vibration that seemed to travel up through the floor and into my bones. I stood there, leaning against the counter, my arms crossed. I closed my eyes and saw Emily's face. I remembered the last time I saw her alive. She had looked pale, tired. She had told me she was just feeling under the weather. She had trusted him. She had taken the glass from his hand and drank it, thinking he was caring for her. The thought made my hands clench into fists so tight my fingernails cut into my palms. The machine beeped. Aris stared at the monitor. He adjusted his glasses, squinting at the peaks and valleys of the chemical graph on the screen. He went still. "Henry," he said softly. "Come look at this." I walked over and looked at the jagged lines I did not understand. "What is it, Aris?" I asked. "It is digoxin," he said, turning to face me. His face was pale. "It is a cardiac glycoside. It is used to treat heart failure and irregular heartbeats. But in a healthy person, or in high doses, it is a poison." I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. Digoxin. I knew the name. It was the silent killer. "How does it work?" I asked, my voice flat. "It increases the force of the heart's contractions, but slows the rate." Aris explained, his voice trembling slightly. "If you overdose, it causes nausea, vertigo, and confusion. Eventually, the heart slows down so much, it just stops. It mimics a massive cardiac arrest. To an untrained coroner without a specific toxicology screen, it looks like natural causes, especially if the victim had a history of stress. The orange juice, the bitterness Leo had described, the dizziness Emily had complained about. It all fit. And the dose, I asked. Aris looked back at the screen. Each one of these pills contains enough digoxin to kill a horse if taken over a few days. If she was taking this nightly, Henry, she did not stand a chance. It accumulated in her system until her heart just gave up. I stared at the white powder on the glass dish. It wasn't medicine. It was a weapon. Derek had not used a gun or a knife. He had used trust. Aris took a step back, pulling off his gloves. He looked terrified. "Henry," he said, his voice urgent, "you are not investigating fraud anymore. This is homicide. This is premeditated murder. You need to take this to the police, right now. You cannot handle this alone. You are playing with fire." I looked at my friend. I saw the fear in his eyes, and I understood it. But I also knew the law. I knew how slippery men like Derek could be. "If I go to the police now, Aras," I said, picking up the evidence bag, "Derek will have a lawyer within the hour. He will claim he didn't know what was in the bottle. He will claim Emily was self-medicating. He will claim the pills were planted. The chain of custody is broken because I took them from the trash. A good defense attorney will rip this apart." "Then what are you going to do?" Aras asked. "You cannot let him get away with this." "I am not going to let him get away," I said, my voice cold and hard. "But I need to catch him in the act. I need to tie him to the money and the murder at the same time. I need him to confess. And I know exactly how to make him do it." Aras shook his head. "You are insane, Henry." "No," I said, walking toward the door. "I am a father. And I have 48 hours to finish what he started." I left the lab and walked back out into the fog. I climbed into my truck and sat there for a moment, the bottle of pills sitting on the passenger seat like a silent passenger. I had the weapon. Now I needed the timing. As if on cue, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out. It was a notification from the surveillance software I had set up in the shipping container. The audio bug in the study had picked up a conversation. I plugged in my earpiece and pressed play. The recording was from 10 minutes ago. The voice was Derek's. He sounded excited. Manic. "I just got off the phone with the buyers, Tanya. They are wiring the cash. They want to sign the final deed transfer on Monday morning. 9 a.m. sharp." Then Tanya's voice, smooth and purring. "Are you sure the old man is gone? Are you sure he won't make a scene? He is in a nursing home by now." Derek laughed. "He is history. Once we sign those papers on Monday, the house is sold, the insurance money clears, and we are on a flight to the Caymans by noon. We are free, baby. We are rich." Monday, 9 a.m. I looked at the dashboard clock. It was Friday morning. I had 3 days. 3 days to set a trap that would bring the entire house of cards crashing down on their heads. They thought they were signing a sale agreement on Monday. They had no idea they would be signing their own arrest warrants. I put the truck in gear. The grief was still there, a heavy stone in my chest, but it was pushed aside by a cold, sharp clarity. Derek wanted to sell the house. Fine. I would be there to make sure the transaction was one he would never forget. I drove back toward my container. I had work to do. I had to draft legal documents. I had to coordinate with the sheriff. And I had to prepare the final performance of my life. The old man was about to come back from the dead. Back inside the metal walls of my shipping container, the air was thick with the smell of stale coffee and the hum of the server cooling fans. It was Sunday night. Outside, the city was sleeping, resting before the start of a new week. But inside, I was wide awake, surrounded by stacks of paper that documented the dismantling of my son-in-law's life. I had the evidence of the murder. I had the evidence of the theft. But to truly crush him, to strip him of the arrogance that fueled his cruelty, and I needed to take away the one thing he thought was his birthright: the house. I reached into a file box marked Property Deeds 2019 and pulled out a thick bound document. This was the original purchase agreement for the Victorian estate. I remembered the day we signed it. Derek had been too busy popping a bottle of Dom Perignon to read the fine print. He had just seen the keys and the address and assumed he was the king of the castle. But he had forgotten who he was dealing with. I am a man who reads every footnote. I opened the document to page 412. There, in black and white, was the structure of the deal. Derek and Emily were not the owners. Not technically, Because I had put up 60% of the down payment, and because Derek's credit score at the time was mediocre due to some failed investments, I had structured the purchase through a shell company I controlled. Caldwell Holdings, LLC. To the outside world and to Derek's ego, it looked like a standard purchase. But legally, it was a rent-to-own agreement, a lease option contract. It meant that Derek and Emily were tenants with an exclusive option to buy the home after 10 years, provided they maintained the property and crucially remained in good legal standing. I ran my finger down the page until I found Clause 14b, the Moral Turpitude and Criminal Activity Clause. It stated clearly that if the tenant engages in any illegal activity on the premises, including but not limited to fraud, domestic abuse, or felonies, the lease is immediately terminated. The option to purchase is voided, and all equity payments made to date are forfeited to the landlord as liquidated damages. I am the landlord. Derek thought he was selling a house he owned to pay off his debts. In reality, he was trying to sell my property, and by poisoning my daughter and laundering money under my roof, he had just triggered Clause 14b. He didn't own the house. He didn't even have a right to sleep there anymore. He was just a squatter in a suit. I sat down at the computer and began to draft the eviction notice. It was a writ of possession citing immediate termination of the lease due to criminal conduct. I typed with a steady rhythm, the clicking of the keys sounding like the cocking of a gun. I cited the police report number I was about to generate. I cited the forensic accounting evidence. I cited the toxicology report. When the document was finished, I printed it out. It was 5 pages of legal destruction. I signed it with a heavy hand. Henry Caldwell, Managing Director, Caldwell Holdings, LLC. Now I needed the cavalry. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I hadn't called in 2 years. It rang 4 times before a gruff voice answered. "Sheriff Miller," the voice said. "It is 3 a.m. This better be good." "It is Henry Caldwell, Jim," I said. There was a pause. The tone on the other end shifted from annoyance to alertness. "Henry, I haven't heard from you since the retirement party. Is everything okay? I heard about Emily. I am so sorry." "I need a favor, Jim," I said, my voice tight. "And I need you to listen to me very carefully, because I am only going to say this once. I know who killed her." I spent the next 45 minutes laying it all out. I told him about the digoxin. I told him about the money laundering. I told him about the wiretap recording of Derek confessing to the insurance fraud. I sent him the encrypted files while we were on the phone. At first he was skeptical, but as he opened the files and saw the toxicology report from Dr. Aris and heard Derek's own voice laughing about the insurance payout, the skepticism vanished. "My God," Henry Miller whispered. "The son of a bitch." "I need you at the house at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning, Jim," I said. "That is when he is finalizing the sale. That is when he thinks he is getting away with it. I want him to sign those papers. I want him to commit the wire fraud in front of witnesses. And then I want you to take him down." "I will bring Detective Thorne from Homicide Miller," said his voice hard. "We will be there." "Do not do anything stupid, Henry. Do not engage him alone." "I am not going to engage him, Jim," I said. "I am just going to serve him an eviction notice." I hung up the phone. The sun was starting to crest over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of bruised purple and gray. It was Monday morning, the day of the sale, the day of judgment. I stood up and walked to the corner of the container where my garment bag was hanging. I unzipped it. Inside was my old charcoal gray suit. I hadn't worn it since my last day in court, the day I put away a corrupt senator. It smelled faintly of mothballs and cedar. I stripped off my flannel shirt and work pants. I shaved my face with cold water and a disposable razor, scraping away the gray stubble until my jaw was smooth and sharp. I put on the white dress shirt, buttoning it all the way to the top. I tied my tie a dark crimson silk in a perfect Windsor knot. I stepped into the trousers and pulled the suspenders over my shoulders. I slipped into the jacket. It still fit. A little loose around the waist maybe, but it fit. I reached into the inner pocket of the jacket and pulled out a small velvet box. Inside was a pin. It was the gold lapel pin of the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners. It was a small thing, barely an inch wide, but it represented 40 years of hunting liars. I fastened it to my lapel. I looked at myself in the small mirror hanging on the metal wall. The sad, broken old man who had walked away from the funeral was gone. In his place stood the auditor, the man who balanced the books, the man who ensured that everyone paid what they owed. Derek owed a debt of blood and money, and today I was going to collect it all. I picked up the thick file containing the eviction notice, the toxicology report, and the bank statements. I put them in my leather briefcase. I walked out of the container and into the cool morning air. The rain had stopped. The sky was clear. I climbed into my truck. It was time to go home. It was time to take back what was mine. Monday morning broke over Seattle with a rare and brilliant sunshine, the kind of light that usually promises hope and new beginnings. But inside the Victorian estate on the hill, the sunlight streaming through the bay windows was only illuminating a crime in progress. It was 9 o'clock in the morning. The air in the dining room smelled of expensive cologne, fresh pastries, and the sharp metallic tang of ink. Derek sat at the head of the long mahogany table looking like a king who had just conquered a new kingdom. He was wearing a suit that cost more than my first car, his hair perfectly coiffed, his face flushed with the adrenaline of a gamble that was about to pay off. Beside him sat Tanya, radiant in a white dress that was perhaps a little too bridal for a woman who was technically just a real estate agent. And across from them sat their lawyer, a man named Marcus, who had a smile like a shark and eyes that constantly scanned the room as if calculating the value of the furniture. The table was covered in paperwork. Deeds, title transfers, wire instruction forms. It was a mountain of legal documents designed to bury the truth and wash the blood money clean. Marcus slid a heavy document across the polished wood. "This is the final transfer deed," he said, his voice smooth and oily. "Once you sign this, the property rights are transferred to the Shell Corporation in the Cayman Islands. The sale to the new buyers will be executed immediately after, and the funds will be wired directly to your offshore account. The house will be sold, the money will be gone, and there will be no paper trail leading back to either of you." Derek picked up the heavy fountain pen. He twirled it in his fingers, savoring the moment. He looked at Tanya, his eyes gleaming with triumph. "We did it," he whispered. Tanya reached out and squeezed his hand, her fingernails digging into his palm. "Just sign it, Derek," she urged, her voice tight, with a mixture of excitement and anxiety. "I want to get out of here. This house gives me the creeps. I feel like she's watching us." Derek laughed, a loud, booming sound that echoed off the high ceilings. "Let her watch," he said, uncapping the pen. "Let her see that I finally won." She tried to hold me back with her caution and her morals. But look at us now. 5 million from the insurance, 2 million from the house. We are going to live like royalty. He pressed the nib of the pen to the paper. The ink flowed dark and permanent. He signed his name with a flourish. "Derek Vance." He passed the pen to Tanya. She signed her name as the witness and the new beneficiary. Tanya Miller. Marcus took the papers back, organizing them into a neat stack. He pulled out a bottle of Cristal champagne from his briefcase, a premature celebration he had clearly planned. "Congratulations," he said, popping the cork with a soft hiss. "To the easiest $2 million I have ever made." Derek took the crystal flute, the bubbles rising to the surface. He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the manicured lawn. To shedding dead weight, he toasted, raising the glass to the sunlight. Tanya giggled, taking a sip. "Speaking of dead weight," she said, licking a drop of champagne from her lip. "Where do you think the old man is right now?" Derek snorted, taking a long drink. "Henry, he is probably sitting in the cafeteria of that nursing home in Tacoma, staring at a bowl of oatmeal, and wondering where it all went wrong. Or maybe he is rotting in some cheap motel by the airport counting his pennies. He turned back to the room, his face twisted in a sneer of pure contempt. The look on his face when I told him to get out was priceless, Derek continued. He looked so small, so pathetic. He actually thought he had power here. He thought because he paid the down payment 5 years ago that he owned me. Well, look who owns who now. I kicked him to the curb like a bag of trash, and he didn't even fight back. That is the thing about people like Henry. They are weak. They follow the rules. And that is why they lose. Tanya laughed, relaxing into her chair. I was worried for a second when he found that parking receipt, she admitted. But you were right. He is just a confused old man. He probably forgot about it 10 minutes later. He is history, Derek declared, pouring himself another glass. He is a ghost. And after today, we will never have to think about him again. The room fell into a comfortable silence filled only with the soft clinking of crystal glasses and the shuffling of papers as Marcus packed up his briefcase. They were safe. They were rich. They were untouchable. And then the sound began. It started as a low drone in the distance, barely audible over the hum of the conversation. But it grew louder quickly, a rising wail that cut through the morning air. Sirens. Derek froze his glass halfway to his mouth. Tanya sat up straight, her eyes widening. Marcus stopped packing his bag. Is that police? Tanya asked, her voice trembling slightly. Derek walked to the window and peered through the sheer curtains. Down the long, winding driveway, blue and red lights were flashing against the trees. Not one car, not two. 3 police cruisers were speeding up the hill, their sirens screaming, now shattering the peace of the wealthy neighborhood. Tanya stood up, knocking her chair over. Derek. They are coming here. Why are they coming here? Derek turned around, his face pale for a split second before the arrogance rushed back in. He set his glass down firmly. Relax, he snapped. Calm down. They are not here for us. Why would they be here for us? We haven't done anything. The insurance claim is still processing. The house sale is legal. Then why are there 3 cars? Marcus asked, clutching his briefcase to his chest. Derek buttoned his suit jacket, smoothing out the lapels. He checked his reflection in the mirror, adjusting his tie. It is probably the old man, he said, a cruel smile returning to his lips. What? Tanya asked. Henry, Derek said, shaking his head with mock pity. I bet he came back. I bet he is parked at the gate crying and making a scene, refusing to leave. The neighbors probably called the cops on him for trespassing. Or maybe he tried to break in. He laughed again, but this time it sounded a little forced. I told you he was pathetic, Derek said, walking toward the front door. Now I have to go out there and deal with him one last time. I have to watch the police drag him away in handcuffs for harassment. This is actually perfect. It is the cherry on top. He reached the heavy oak door of the main entrance. He paused, taking a deep breath, preparing his face to look like the aggrieved homeowner, the victim of a crazy father-in-law. Stay here, he commanded Tanya and Marcus. Let me handle this. I want to enjoy this moment. I want to see the look in his eyes when the sheriff tells him he has no rights here. Derek grabbed the brass handle. He turned it. He thought he was opening the door to victory. He thought he was about to humiliate me one last time. He thought he was the smartest man in the room. He threw the door open with a flourish, stepping out onto the porch with his chest puffed out, ready to shout at a sad old man in a rusted truck. But there was no truck. And there was no sad old man. Instead, Derek found himself staring down the barrel of 3 service revolvers. Sheriff Miller stood at the bottom of the steps, his face grim. Behind him stood 2 deputies and a man in a trench coat who looked like he hadn't slept in a week, Detective Thorne from Homicide. And standing next to the sheriff, leaning casually against the hood of a police cruiser, wearing a sharp gray suit and a gold pin that caught the morning sun, was me. I looked at Derek. His mouth hung open. The arrogance drained from his face like water from a cracked glass, replaced by a dawn of absolute terrifying realization. "Hello, Derek," I said, my voice calm and clear over the idling engines. Derek stammered, taking a step back. What is this? Officers, this man is trespassing. He is harassing us. I want him removed." Sheriff Miller didn't blink. He walked up the steps, pulling a folded piece of paper from his pocket. It wasn't an eviction notice for me. It was a warrant. Derek Vance, the sheriff, boomed. "You are under arrest for the murder of Emily Vance, insurance fraud, and money laundering." Derek's knees buckled. He grabbed the doorframe to stay upright. "Murder," he squeaked. "That is insane. She died of a heart attack." I stepped forward then. I walked up the stairs until I was standing right in front of him. I could smell the champagne on his breath. I could smell the fear. I looked him deep in the eyes, letting him see the cold, hard calculation of the man he had underestimated. "She didn't die of a heart attack, Derek," I said softly, so only he could hear. "She died of digoxin poisoning. The same digoxin found in the vitamin bottle you threw in the trash. The same digoxin you bought with the money you stole from her savings." Derek's eyes darted to the side, looking for an escape, but there was nowhere to go. "And by the way," I added, leaning closer, "you didn't just sign a transfer deed in there. You signed a confession. I have the audio recording of the last 30 minutes. Every word, every toast, every joke about me rotting in a motel." I reached out and patted his cheek, just like he had patted my shoulder at the funeral. "I am not rotting, Derek. But you are about to be." The color left his face completely. He looked like a corpse, standing upright. Sheriff Miller grabbed Derek's wrist, spinning him around. The sound of handcuffs clicking shut was the sweetest music I had ever heard. It was louder than the sirens, louder than the champagne corks. From inside the house, a scream erupted. Tanya had just looked out the window. I straightened my tie. The morning air was crisp and clean. The game was over. I had won. But the satisfaction wasn't about the victory. It was about the justice. "Get him out of my house, Sheriff," I said, turning my back on him. "I have some cleaning to do." The silence that followed Sheriff Miller's arrival was heavy, broken only by the squawking of the police radio and the ragged breathing of my son-in-law. Derek stood there on the porch, his hand still pointing at me, but his finger was trembling now. The arrogance that had fueled him just moments ago was flickering like a dying candle in a windstorm. He looked from the sheriff to me, and then back to the sheriff, his mind frantically trying to reassemble a reality that had just shattered. Officer Derek stammered, his voice pitching up an octave. "You have to listen to me. This man is Henry Caldwell. He is my father-in-law, but he is mentally unstable. He has been stalking us. He has been threatening us. I want you to arrest him immediately for trespassing on private property." He took a step forward, trying to regain his command of the situation, trying to use his expensive suit and his white male privilege as a shield. "He does not live here," Derek insisted, his voice gaining a little more strength. "I am the owner of this estate. I want him off my land. Now." Sheriff Miller looked at Derek. He didn't blink. He didn't nod. He simply adjusted his hat, his face a mask of stone. Then, with a deliberate slowness that was more insulting than any slap, he turned his back on Derek completely. He walked right past the man claiming to be the owner of the house. He walked down the 2 steps to where I was standing by the police cruiser. He extended his hand. "Good morning, Mr. Caldwell," the sheriff said, his voice respectful and loud enough for everyone to hear. "I trust we are in time to execute your orders." I shook the sheriff's hand, feeling the rough calluses against my palm. "Perfect timing, Jim," I replied. "Thank you for coming." The color drained from Derek's face so fast, it looked like he had been bled dry. He stood frozen, his mouth opening and closing like a fish pulled from the water. Behind him in the doorway, Tanya gasped, her hand flying to her throat. Marcus, the crooked lawyer, stopped dead in his tracks, clutching his briefcase to his chest, as if it contained a bomb. "Execute his orders." Derek whispered the words, barely escaping his throat. "What are you talking about?" "This is my house. I have the deed." We just signed the papers. I walked up the stairs slowly. I didn't rush. I wanted him to feel every second of this. I stopped on the step just below him so we were eye to eye. I reached into my leather briefcase and pulled out the document I had printed in the shipping container. "You have a deed, Derek," I said calmly, "but you clearly never read it. Or maybe you just assumed that because I was an old man, I was stupid." I held the document up. It was the original purchase agreement from 5 years ago. "Do you remember when we bought this place?" I asked. "I put up the down payment. You had bad credit. You couldn't get a loan for a doghouse, let alone a Victorian estate. So I structured the deal." I flipped the page, the paper snapping in the crisp morning air. "I formed a company called Caldwell Holdings LLC. That company bought the house. That company is the legal owner. You, Derek, and my daughter Emily were signed on as tenants with a rent-to-own option. It is a standard lease option agreement." Derek shook his head violently. No, that is a lie. We paid the mortgage every month. We paid the property taxes. You paid rent." I corrected him, my voice cutting through his panic. "You paid a monthly fee to my company, which I then used to pay the bank. To you, it felt like a mortgage. To the law, it was rent. And like any rental agreement, it comes with conditions." I turned to the page I had bookmarked. "Clause 412. Read it." "Derek," I said, shoving the paper into his chest. "Read Section C." Derek grabbed the paper. His hands were shaking so hard he could barely hold it steady. He stared at the words, his eyes darting back and forth, trying to find a loophole, trying to find an escape. "I will read it for you," I said, reciting the words I had memorized. Clause 412, Section C. The Moral Turpitude and Criminal Activity Clause. If the tenant engages in any felony activity on the premises, including fraud or acts of violence, the lease is immediately terminated. The option to purchase is voided, and all equity paid to date is forfeited to the landlord as liquidated damages. I took a step closer, invading his personal space. "Murder is a felony, Derek. Insurance fraud is a felony. Money laundering is a felony." Derek dropped the paper. It fluttered to the ground, landing in a puddle of muddy water. You cannot do this," he whispered, tears of rage and terror welling up in his eyes. "I have put $200,000 into this house, and you just lost it all." I said, cold as ice. "You are not the owner, Derek. You are a tenant who just violated his lease, and as the CEO of Caldwell Holdings LLC, I am evicting you, effective immediately." Derek let out a guttural scream. It was the sound of a trapped animal. He lunged at me, his hands reaching for my throat. "You old bastard, I will kill you." But he never reached me. Sheriff Miller moved with the speed of a man half his age. He tackled Derek, slamming him face first into the porch railing. The wood groaned under the impact. Derek's arm was twisted behind his back, and the second click of handcuffs echoed through the yard. "Get off me," Derek screamed, thrashing against the sheriff's grip. "This is my house. Look at the papers inside, Marcus. Tell them." I looked past Derek to the doorway. Marcus, the lawyer, was trying to inch his way back into the shadows of the foyer. He met my gaze. He saw the gold pin on my lapel. He knew exactly who I was now. He knew that if he opened his mouth to defend Derek, he would be disbarred and indicted as a co-conspirator. Marcus looked at Derek, then looked at me. He dropped his head. "Mr. Vance," Marcus said quietly, his voice trembling, "I advise you to remain silent. The contract appears to be valid." "Valid," Derek shrieked, his face pressed against the wood railing. "You said it was airtight." "It is airtight," I said, looking down at him. "It was written to protect my daughter." I just never thought the person I would have to protect her from was her husband. Tanya was sobbing now, sliding down the doorframe until she was sitting on the floor, her expensive white dress pooling around her like a shroud. She looked at me with mascara running down her cheeks. I didn't know she wailed. I didn't know he didn't own the house. I looked at her. You didn't know a lot of things, Tanya, I said. Like the fact that the offshore account you set up, I flagged it with the FBI this morning. The moment that insurance money hits it, it will be frozen. You are not rich, you are broke, and you are going to prison as an accessory to murder. Tanya buried her face in her hands. Sheriff Miller hauled Derek to his feet. Derek's nose was bleeding, dripping red drops onto his pristine white shirt. He looked at me, and for the first time I saw true fear in his eyes. The arrogance was gone. The greed was gone. There was only the realization that he was about to lose everything. Why, Derek rasped. Why didn't you just tell me? Why did you let me believe I owned it? Because I wanted to see who you really were, I said. And when you showed me, I wanted to make sure you paid the full price. I turned to the sheriff. Take him away, Jim. He is trespassing on my property. As the deputies dragged Derek down the stairs, kicking and screaming, I bent down and picked up the muddy contract from the floor. I wiped the dirt off Clause 412. It was just a piece of paper. But it was the shield that had saved my grandson's future. I looked at the house. My house. It was tainted now. It held bad memories. But bricks and mortar can be cleaned. Evil can be scrubbed away. I walked into the foyer, stepping over Marcus's briefcase. I had a lot of work to do. But for the first time since Emily died, the house didn't feel like a tomb. It felt like a fortress. And the king had returned. The chaos on the porch was a swirling storm of shouting voices and physical struggle, but in the center of it, I stood perfectly still. Derek was thrashing against the grip of the deputies, his face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. He was not looking at the law enforcement officers who were holding him. He was looking at me. His eyes were bulging veins popping in his neck as he screamed obscenities that would make a sailor blush. He was desperate, cornered, and like any cornered animal, he decided to attack the only thing he thought he could destroy. With a surge of hysterical strength, Derek wrenched one arm free from the deputy's grasp. He lunged toward me, his fingers hooked into claws aiming for my face. "I will kill you, Henry," he roared, spit flying from his mouth. "I will kill you for this." I did not flinch. I did not step back. I simply watched him come. But he never made it. From the shadows of the doorway, a figure moved with the speed of a striking cobra. It was Detective Thorne from the Homicide Division. He stepped in front of me, planting a heavy hand on Derek's chest and shoving him backward with enough force to knock the wind out of him. Derek stumbled, crashing back against the siding of the house, gasping for air. "That is enough," Thorne barked, his voice deep and gravelly, cutting through the noise like a knife. "You are done, Mr. Vance." Derek looked up, wheezing, his eyes darting between Thorne and me. "Who are you?" Derek spat. "Get out of my way. This is a family matter." "It stopped being a family matter when you decided to play God with your wife's life," I said, stepping out from behind the detective. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. It felt heavy in my hand, not because of its weight, but because of the burden of the truth it carried. I looked at Derek, who was still trying to process what was happening. He thought he was being arrested for fraud. He thought this was about money. He had no idea that the walls were closing in from every side. "You think you are smart, Derek," I said, my voice calm but laced with a cold fury. "You think you covered your tracks. You deleted the emails. You threw away the bottle. You thought dead women tell no tales." I unlocked the phone and tapped the screen. I had connected it to the Bluetooth speakers on the porch, the ones Derek had installed to play jazz during his cocktail parties. "But you forgot one thing," I continued. "You forgot that walls have ears, and you forgot that arrogance makes men loud." I pressed play. The sound that filled the morning air was crystal clear. It was the recording from the bug I had planted in the study the night I broke in. It started with the clink of glasses. Then Derek's voice, unmistakable and arrogant. She was so pathetic at the end, wasn't she? The Derek on the porch froze. His face went from red to a ghostly white in a heartbeat. He stopped struggling. He stopped breathing. The recording continued. It was Tanya's voice next. Did she suspect anything? With the juice, then Derek again laughing. A cruel, heartless laugh that sent shivers down my spine even now. Suspect, please. She drank it like a good little girl. It tastes bitter, Derek, she said. I told her it was a new organic blend for her heart. She thanked me. Can you believe that? She thanked me for killing her. On the porch, the real Derek looked like he had been struck by lightning. His knees gave way, and he slid down the wall, his eyes wide with horror. He looked at the speaker, then at me, shaking his head in silent denial. The recording played on merciless. $5 million, Tanya, plus the house. We are going to live like kings in the Caymans. And the best part is that old fool Henry has no clue. He thinks it was a tragedy. He was crying at the funeral. I almost laughed in his face. I hit the pause button. The silence that followed was absolute. The birds had stopped singing. The wind seemed to hold its breath. Even the deputies looked sickened by what they had just heard. I looked down at Derek. He was huddled on the floor, a broken man. You laughed at my grief, I said, my voice trembling slightly with the effort to control my rage. You mocked my daughter's trust. You turned her love for you into the weapon that killed her. I turned to Tanya. She was still sitting on the floor of the foyer, her face buried in her hands. But as the reality of the recording sank in, she looked up. Her eyes were wild with panic. She looked at Derek, then at the police, and finally at me. She realized the ship was sinking, and she wasn't about to go down with the captain. It wasn't me, she screamed, scrambling to her feet and pointing a shaking finger at Derek. He made me do it. He planned everything, Tanya, Derek gasped, looking at her with betrayal. He told me it was just sleeping pills, Tanya yelled, her voice shrill and hysterical. She grabbed Detective Thorne's arm, begging. He said he just wanted to sedate her so he could get her to sign the papers. I didn't know he was poisoning her. I swear. He switched the bottles. He is the murderer. I'm just a victim here, Derek roared in fury. You lying witch. You were the one who looked up the dosage. You were the one who booked the flights. They were tearing each other apart. The alliance of greed had shattered under the weight of the truth. It was a pathetic sight. Two vultures fighting over the scraps of their own destruction. Detective Thorne didn't want to hear anymore. He nodded to the deputies. Book them, he said. First-degree murder, conspiracy, insurance fraud, the whole package. The deputies hauled Derek to his feet. He didn't fight this time. He was limp, his spirit broken. He looked at me one last time, his eyes empty. Henry, he whispered, please. I stared at him. I didn't see a man. I saw a monster. Goodbye, Derek, I said. The deputy spun him around. The sound of the handcuffs ratcheting tight was loud and final. Click, 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 cold steel biting into the wrists of the man who had strangled the life out of my family. It should have felt like a victory. It should have felt like triumph. But as I watched them drag him down the steps, all I felt was a profound, aching sadness, because no matter how much he suffered, it wouldn't bring Emily back. And then the front door creaked open. My heart stopped. From the shadows of the hallway, a small figure emerged. It was Leo. He was wearing his pajamas, his hair messy from sleep. He was holding his stuffed bear by one ear. He looked at the police cars. He looked at Tanya screaming as she was handcuffed. And then he looked at his father being shoved into the back of a cruiser. Daddy Leo's voice was small, confused, and terrified. No, not this. He wasn't supposed to see this. I had told the sheriff to come at 9 because Leo was supposed to be at school, but I had forgotten. Today was a teacher planning day. There was no school. Derek looked up as he was being pushed into the car. He saw his son. For a second, a look of genuine pain crossed his face. "Leo," he shouted. I moved faster than I had in 20 years. I sprinted up the steps and reached Leo, just as his face began to crumble into tears. I dropped to my knees and pulled him into my chest, wrapping my arms around him, burying his face in my shoulder so he couldn't see. "Don't look, Leo," I whispered fiercely, holding the back of his head. "Don't look. Just close your eyes. Grandpa is here." "Daddy," Leo screamed into my coat, his small body shaking with sobs. "Where are they taking him? What is happening?" I held him tighter, my own tears finally spilling over. I shielded him from the sight of his father being taken away like a criminal. I shielded him from the flashing lights. I shielded him from the ugly truth that would eventually shatter his innocence. "He is going away for a long time, Leo," I said, my voice choking. "But you are safe. I promise you, you are safe." Down in the driveway, the police car doors slammed shut. The engines roared. The sirens blared again as the convoy began to move, taking the poison out of our lives forever. I stayed there on the porch, kneeling on the cold wood, rocking my grandson back and forth as he cried for the man who had murdered his mother. It was the hardest thing I had ever done. Harder than the investigation. Harder than the confrontation. Because now the adrenaline was gone. The anger was fading. And all that was left was the wreckage of a family that I now had to rebuild one brick at a time. I looked out at the empty driveway. The rain had started again, a gentle mist that blurred the world. "We are going to be okay," I whispered to Leo and to myself. "We are going to be okay." But as I held him, I knew that the real work was just beginning. Justice had been served, but the healing would take a lifetime. The smell of fresh paint is the smell of a new beginning. It covers up the scent of old cologne, the musty odor of secrets, and the lingering memories of a man who tried to destroy us. It has been 30 days since the police cars rolled down the driveway, and today the Victorian estate on the hill does not look like a crime scene anymore. It looks like a home. I stood in the center of the living room, wiping a smudge of sunbeam yellow from my cheek. Beside me, Leo was holding a roller that was slightly too big for his hands, but he was attacking the wall with a determination that made me smile. We were painting over the cold, sterile gray that Derek had chosen. We were erasing him one stroke at a time. Grandpa, Leo said, pausing to dip his roller into the tray. "Do you think Mom would like this color?" I looked at the wall glowing warm and bright in the afternoon sun. "I think she would love it, Leo," I said softly. "She always said this room needed more light." Leo smiled a genuine toothy grin that reached his eyes. It was the first time in a month I had seen him smile without a shadow of fear behind it. The nightmares had stopped about a week ago. The therapy was helping, but I knew that what helped him the most was simply knowing that the monster was never coming back. And he wasn't. The trial had been swift. With the mountain of evidence I had provided, the audio recordings, the financial records, the toxicology report, Derek's high-priced defense team didn't stand a chance. The jury took less than 2 hours to deliberate. I was there in the courtroom when the verdict was read. Derek stood up, looking thinner, his expensive suit hanging loosely on his frame. When the judge announced, "Guilty on all counts," Derek didn't scream. He didn't rage. He just slumped into his chair, looking small and defeated. The judge sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He will die in a concrete box, stripped of his luxury, his arrogance, and his freedom. He wanted to live like a king in the Caymans. Instead, he will live as inmate 8940 at the state penitentiary. Tanya took a plea deal. She testified against Derek to save her own skin, painting herself as a victim of his manipulation. The jury didn't buy her innocence, but her testimony secured Derek's fate. She got 15 years. She will be middle-aged when she gets out. Her beauty faded, her reputation destroyed, and her criminal record permanent. They were gone. The house was legally ours now. I had transferred the deed into a trust for Leo. I wasn't the landlord anymore. I was just Grandpa. I walked over to the window and looked out at the garden. The weeds were gone. I had spent the last 2 weekends pulling them out, planting new rose bushes where the old ones had withered. I picked up the mug of tea I had left on the windowsill. It was still warm. I walked out onto the porch, the same porch where I had confronted Derek, the same porch where he had tried to evict me. It was peaceful now. The wind chimes sang softly in the breeze. I sat down in the rocking chair. My bones ached a little. Painting is hard work for a 70-year-old, but it was a good ache. It was the ache of living, not of grieving. I thought about the insurance money, $5 million. The policy was contested, of course, but because Derek was the murderer, the payout was redirected to Emily's estate, which meant it went to Leo. I didn't touch a dime of it for myself. I put half of it into a trust for Leo's education and future. With the other half, I started the Emily Vance Foundation. We opened our doors last week. Our mission is to provide legal and financial auditors to help women and the elderly who suspect they are being financially abused or poisoned by their family members. We hire retired accountants and investigators, men and women like me, who society thinks are past their prime. We use our skills to find the truth before it is too late. I took a sip of tea, letting the warmth spread through my chest. People often say that the elderly are useless. They say we are slow. They say we are out of touch with the modern world. They look at our gray hair and our wrinkled skin, and they see weakness. Derek saw weakness. He saw an old man, he could bully an old man, he could toss aside like a piece of broken furniture. But he forgot something important. He forgot to look at the trees. If you look at a forest, the saplings are tall and flexible, bending with the wind. They are beautiful. But when the great storm comes, when the hurricane blows, it is not the saplings that hold the earth together. It is the old oaks. It is the ancient maples. Their bark is rough and scarred. Their branches might be brittle, but their roots go deep. They go down into the dark, rocky soil where the sun doesn't reach. They wrap around the bedrock. And when the storm rages, when the world tries to wash everything away, those deep roots hold the ground. They stop the landslide. They protect the seedlings growing in their shadow. I am an old tree. My bark is scarred by grief. My branches are heavy with loss. But my roots are deep. And as long as I have breath in my body, no storm will ever touch my grandson again. Grandpa. I snapped out of my thoughts. Leo ran out onto the porch, his face smeared with yellow paint, looking like a little sunbeam himself. We finished the wall, he cheered. Come see, it looks amazing. I set my tea down and stood up. I looked at this boy, my daughter's legacy, the only thing that mattered. I am coming, Leo, I said, opening my arms. He ran into me, hugging my waist tight. I held him, resting my chin on the top of his head. I looked out at the driveway one last time. It was empty. The past was gone. We turned around and walked back into the house, closing the door on the darkness, stepping into the light we had made for ourselves. The lesson here is simple, but often forgotten. Never mistake silence for ignorance, and never mistake patience for weakness. There are people in your life, perhaps your parents or grandparents, who seem quiet and unassuming. You might think they do not understand the complexities of your modern world. But remember, they have survived storms you cannot even imagine. They have built the foundations you stand on. When you treat them with disrespect, when you underestimate them, you are not just hurting them. You are waking up a dormant force that has a lifetime of experience in survival. Honor your roots, or be prepared to fall when the wind blows. If this story moved you, or if you have ever had to stand tall to protect your family, Please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. It helps me share more stories like this one. And I want to hear from you. Have you ever been underestimated because of your age or your kindness? Tell me your story in the comments below. I read every single one. Thank you for listening, and until next time, keep your roots deep and your eyes open.